December, 1968. A biting chill hangs over Lake Herman Road. For two teenagers, the world was small, warm, and safe inside the confines of a parked car. They didn't hear the engine kill nearby. They didn't see the shadow detach itself from the tree-line. In an instant, the peace of the California night was shattered, replaced by a vacuum of senseless violence. This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was the debut of a phantom, a specter who would soon name himself the Zodiac. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted to be watched. He turned the rolling hills of the Bay Area into a stage for a macabre game of riddles, ciphers, and blood. For over 50 years, his name has been whispered in the halls of justice and the nightmares of the public. Tonight, we step back into the fog, to face the killer who never truly went away. December 20th, 1968. It was a night of firsts. The first official date for 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 17-year-old David Faraday. They had told their parents they were going to a Christmas concert, but instead, they sought the quiet solitude of Lake Herman Road, a local lover's lane. At approximately 11:15 p.m., the silence of the gravel turnout was pierced by the arrival of a second vehicle. It didn't pass by. It pulled up alongside them, an uninvited guest in the dark. What followed was not a conversation, but a siege. The stranger began firing into the car, shattering the glass and the lives within. David Faraday was forced out and executed at point-blank range. Terrified, Betty Lou did the only thing she could, she ran. She sprinted into the darkness, her breath visible in the freezing air, desperately seeking the safety of the road. She didn't make it. 5 shots to the back brought her down in the gravel, just feet away from the car. When the police arrived, they found a scene that defied logic. No robbery. No struggle. Just 2 young lives extinguished by a man who had vanished as quickly as the smoke from his gun. The Golden State had seen murder before, but this felt different. This felt like a beginning. July 4th, 1969. While the rest of Vallejo celebrated Independence Day with bursts of light and color, Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau sought out the shadows of Blue Rock Springs Park. They sat in the quiet, miles away from the festivities. But the shadows were already occupied. A car pulled up behind them, its headlights extinguished. It sat there, a silent observer, before suddenly speeding away. For a few minutes, the silence returned. Then, the car reappeared, boxing them in. A man stepped out, but he wasn't a police officer. He carried a high-powered flashlight in one hand and a 9mm Luger in the other. The light was blinding, a wall of white that masked the killer's face. Without a word, he opened fire. Darlene was struck multiple times. Mike was hit in the neck and shoulder. The killer turned to walk away, but hearing Mike's moans of pain, he calmly walked back to the car and fired 2 more shots into each of them. It was a cold, systematic finishing move. Darlene Ferrin would not survive the night. But Mike Mageau did. And just 40 minutes later, the mystery deepened. A man called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone. His voice was calm, rehearsed, and terrifying. He didn't just confess to the shooting. He claimed the murders at Lake Herman Road from 6 months prior. The phantom finally had a voice. August 1, 1969. The horror was no longer confined to the dark turnouts of Vallejo. It arrived in the morning mail. 3 nearly identical envelopes were delivered to the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. The letters were chillingly casual. "Dear Editor," they began, before detailing facts about the murders that only the killer and the police could know. But it was the ultimatum that sent a shiver through the Bay Area. The writer demanded his words be printed on the front page of every paper. If they refused, he promised a killing rampage that would claim a dozen lives over the weekend. Inside each envelope was something even more disturbing: 1/3 of a 408-symbol cipher. The killer claimed that once decoded, the message would reveal his true identity. Suddenly, the investigation wasn't just for the police. It was a morbid puzzle for the public. Cryptographers and hobbyists leaned over their morning coffee, staring at the symbols of a madman. The Zodiac had arrived, not just as a murderer, but as a master of ceremonies in a theater of terror. He was no longer hiding, he was haunting the very ink of the morning news. September 27, 1969. A golden afternoon at Lake Berryessa. For college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, it was a day of sun and quiet conversation on a remote peninsula. But the tranquility was an illusion. From the shadows of the oak trees, a nightmare took shape. A man approached them, but he wasn't wearing a mask of a common thief. He wore an elaborate, four-cornered hood, dark as a funeral shroud. On his chest sat the cross circle, the mark of the Zodiac. He moved with a terrifying, calm precision. He didn't want their money, he wanted their fear. After forcing Cecilia to tie Brian up, he bound her as well. Then, the silence of the lake was shattered by the flash of a blade. He didn't use a gun this time. He wanted to be close. He plunged the knife into them repeatedly, a brutal, visceral attack that left them for dead in the grass. But the horror didn't end with the blood. The killer walked calmly back to Brian's car. He didn't flee. He took out a black felt-tip pen and, on the door of the white Volkswagen, he wrote a diary of his crimes. The dates of his previous murders were listed, followed by a chilling new entry: September 27, 69, 6:30, by knife. The Zodiac had left the darkness of the roadside and stepped into the light of day, proving that he wasn't just a killer, he was a predator who owned the land itself. October 11, 1969. The Zodiac moved from the isolated lakes and dark roads into the heart of the city. At the corner of Mason and Geary, a taxi driver named Paul Stein picked up a lone passenger. It should have been a routine fare to the quiet, upscale streets of Presidio Heights. But as the cab pulled to the curb at Washington and Cherry, the routine became a slaughter. A single shot to the head ended Paul Stein's life instantly. From a window just yards away, 3 teenagers watched a scene they couldn't comprehend. They saw a man, not a monster in a hood, but a man in a dark jacket and glasses, calmly leaning over the front seat. He wasn't just hiding evidence, he was taking a trophy. With cold deliberation, he tore away a large, blood-soaked piece of Paul Stein's shirt. The most chilling part. The police were minutes away. Due to a catastrophic dispatch error, officers were told to look for a black suspect, allowing a white man matching the killer's description to walk right past them, disappearing into the swirling fog of the Presidio forest. Days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter that proved the nightmare was far from over. Inside was the scrap of Paul Stine's shirt, a grisly receipt of the murder. The Zodiac had proven he could kill anywhere, at any time, and walk away through the very hands of the law. He wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was the man standing next to you on a city street. By 1970, the Zodiac had achieved his ultimate goal. He was the most famous man in California, yet he remained a ghost. The murders on the road had evolved into a campaign of psychological warfare. The phones at the Vallejo and Oakland police departments would ring in the dead of night. When officers picked up, they weren't met with a plea for mercy or a confession, they were met with a heavy, rhythmic breathing that felt like a physical touch through the receiver. Sometimes, the voice would speak, claiming responsibility for new crimes, mocking the detectives by name, and laughing at their inability to catch him. His letters became more frequent and more boastful. He began a grim tally at the bottom of his correspondence: Zodiac, 10, SFPD, 0. As the months passed, that number climbed to 17, then 26, and finally, a staggering 37 victims. While the police could only definitively link him to 5 deaths, the discrepancy fueled a citywide paranoia. Was he a serial liar, or was he the most prolific killer in American history, hiding his victims in the vast California wilderness? He taunted the public with more ciphers, including the infamous Z13, which he claimed contained his name. To this day, the symbols remain a locked door. He didn't just want to kill people, he wanted to kill the public's sense of safety, transforming every mailbox and every ringing phone into a potential encounter with a monster. The Zodiac case isn't just a mystery, it is a collection of fractures in reality. The most haunting anomaly occurred on the night of Paul Stine's murder. Officers Don Falk and Eric Zelms were speeding toward the crime scene when they saw a white man walking calmly away from the direction of the taxi. They looked him in the eye. They saw his gait, his clothes, his face. But the radio had crackled with a fatal error: look for a black suspect. Based on a mistake, the officers continued on, leaving the most wanted killer in history to vanish into the dark canopy of the Presidio forest. It was a mistake that would haunt the department for decades. But the inconsistencies didn't stop there. Witness descriptions from each crime scene felt like they were describing different men. At Lake Berryessa, he was beefy and tall. At Blue Rock Springs, he was shorter, with a rounder face. Some reported reddish-brown hair, others swore it was dark and greasy. This leads to the most unsettling theory of all: was the Zodiac a single person, or was he a shadow cast by multiple men? Or perhaps he was a master of the mundane, a man so average and forgettable that he could shift his very identity at will. The more evidence the police gathered, the more the image of the killer seemed to dissolve. In the search for the Zodiac, the truth is a mirror that has been shattered. Every piece shows you a different face, but none of them show you the whole man. In the decades of silence that followed the murders, one name became synonymous with the shadow of the Zodiac: Arthur Lee Allen. He wasn't a phantom in a hood, He was a man living in a basement in Vallejo, surrounded by the tools of a dark obsession. The coincidences surrounding Alan are staggering. He was a former schoolteacher and a convicted child molester who was obsessed with the concept of hunting humans. He wore a Zodiac brand diving watch, a gift from his mother, bearing the exact cross-circle symbol that the killer used to sign his letters. He owned the same caliber of weapons. He wore size 10.5 wing walker boots, the same rare tread found in the blood-soaked soil at Lake Berryessa. When police raided his home, they found a man who seemed to have spent his life preparing for a war against society. He told friends about killing people with a flashlight attached to a gun, before the public ever knew the Zodiac's methods. Yet, the law is built on certainty, and the Zodiac was built on doubt. Alan's fingerprints didn't match the ones found on the taxi. His DNA, tested decades later, didn't match the saliva on the stamps. His handwriting was deemed different from the cryptic letters. Was Arthur Lee Allen a genius of misdirection, a man who could write with his other hand and leave false prints to mock the detectives? Or was he just a dark, broken man who happened to fit the silhouette of a monster? He died in 1992, taking his secrets to the grave, leaving us to wonder if the prime suspect was the killer, or the Zodiac's final, greatest distraction. By 1974, the ink finally ran dry. The letters that had once held the Bay Area in a chokehold of terror simply stopped arriving. The Zodiac didn't say goodbye, he simply stepped back into the fog from which he emerged. The case didn't end, it fossilized. It moved from the front pages of newspapers to the dusty, forgotten corners of police archives. For decades, the mountain of evidence sat in silence, thousands of tips, hundreds of suspects, and those maddening, unbreakable ciphers. But the digital age brought a new kind of hunter. In December 2020, over 50 years after it was mailed, a team of private citizens using massive computing power finally cracked the Z340 cipher. The world held its breath, expecting a confession or a name. Instead, they found a message from a ghost. "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me," the message read. He spoke of the slaves he was collecting for his afterlife. He remained defiant, mocking his pursuers from across a half-century of silence. Even with our modern technology, even with our satellites and DNA databases, the Zodiac remains the ultimate anomaly. He didn't just escape the law, he transformed himself into an American myth, a monster made of ink, blood, and the terrifying realization that some secrets are never meant to be found. The Zodiac is only the beginning. If you have been following this story and you are enjoying it, please like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. The Zodiac once wrote, "I am waiting for a good movie about me." He got his movies. He got his books. He achieved the immortality he craved, carved into the history of American crime. But while we analyze his ciphers and debate his identity, the reality remains cold and final. Somewhere in a quiet cemetery, 5 young people sleep in graves that should never have been dug. The investigation officially remains open. DNA samples sit in cold storage, waiting for a match that may never come. The leads grow thin, and the witnesses grow old. But the shadow he cast hasn't shrunk. Think about the people you pass on the street. The quiet neighbor who keeps his curtains drawn. The elderly man in the park with a sharp, calculating gaze. Time has a way of hiding monsters in plain sight. If the Zodiac survived his own darkness, he would be an old man now, perhaps sitting in a recliner, watching a video just like this one, smiling at the fact that we are still saying his name. The files are still open. The ciphers are still waiting. And the truth? The truth is out there, lurking in the fog, just out of reach. The question, if the Zodiac were standing right behind you at this very moment, would you even know? Or would he be just another shadow in the dark?